Welcome to the Show Up Dad podcast. This podcast is created for hardworking fathers. And at the Show Up Dad, we recognize that fathers providing for their children are certainly important. But when men truly understand their unique role and gain the knowledge and skills to be great fathers, they can transform and impact future generations. Today's guest is Victor Robledo. He has been a strength and fitness coach for almost 30 years. He owned and operated a personal training and gymnastics facility for 20 years in Coronado, California. In 2015, he and his wife decided to sell everything and downsize to an RV to enjoy more time with his 5 children. In 2017, he closed his brick and mortar to travel full time. Through the difficulty he had traveling, he discovered that his trauma and childhood programming was holding him back from the true health and happiness he wanted to experience with his family. Now he specializes in empowering fathers and husbands to overcome their trauma, programming, anxiety, and depression so they can live amazing lives. Welcome to the Show Up, brother.
Dave, thank you for having me. It's amazing to be here.
Absolutely, man. Like always, Victor, I always open up with you telling our guests a little bit about your relationship with your father and your childhood, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm a first generation American. I was born and raised in San Diego, California, but my mother and father were born in Mexico, in Guadalajara and Jalisco. And they both immigrated to the United States when they were young, and they actually went to San Diego High. And as a child myself, coming from that, we come from a long line of grinders, as I like to put it. We know how to put in work. So growing up, I think was a uniquely challenging area. My parents made significant sacrifices to give us, like many parents do, to give us the things that they didn't have. A big part of that had to do with, providing us with an education and a home. I still, once in a while, my dad will drive us, when we used to act up, he used to would drive us downtown San Diego and drive by the 1-bedroom studio that him and his 3 brothers and sisters, like, you want those pair of tennis shoes? Let me show you something. And so I grew up with that sort of being taught and inground into me. And so I went to parochial school K through 12, in large part due to the rough area that we grew up in. And my relationship with my dad was tough, man. He's still a tough man to know and get to understand. He grew up in many ways. He immigrated to the United States without his father. It's just his mother and his brother and 2 sisters. And so he had challenges associated with opening up emotionally. And so that certainly left some challenges for me. But what I did gain from him was a work ethic like no one's business. Like, go to work, check in, put in the time. And that was incredibly powerful.
Victor, I wanted to touch on something you said. You said about the tennis shoes. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so he would take you to go see shoes, and can you elaborate a little bit?
No. So, as kids, my dad was a pipe welder, worked in the shipyards down in San Diego. My mom worked at a bank. And once in a while, things get tight. He gets laid off. I actually remembered writing a paper called "Laid Off," what that meant in our household. Because we knew that things had to buckle down, rice and beans and tortillas a little bit more, because of that. And so when we'd ask for something, or we'd act up, we act entitled, my dad would show us where he grew up in that 1-bedroom studio to make ends meet. And that would show us the gratitude. Like, okay, Dad, we got it. You don't have to drive us. We got it. And so that's what I meant. Like, I would ask for a pair, my friends had a pair of Nikes. Can I have a pair of Nikes? I don't want these Pro Wings. And like, no, we can't afford that right now.
Yeah.
So they would show us that.
And the reason why I was trying to draw some light on that, Victor, is because my wife had the same thing growing up, right?
Right.
And she catches herself telling our daughter, no, you shouldn't. That's too expensive. Get the less expensive one. And then she finally realizes that, wait a minute, this was taught to me, and now I'm teaching this to our daughter, to where when my daughter, when she goes with me and we go and get her stuff, she's always looking to get the lesser of something. And I'm like, dude, and I'm not saying this to brag. God's blessed us tremendously.
Sure.
You know, as a lineman, we make a lot of money. Okay.
Right.
And we could afford nice stuff, you know, not saying we're gonna go out there and blow everything out and anything like that. But you know what I mean? We could afford her to have the stuff that we didn't have. But that mentality, that training that my wife was showing her, and we had to correct that. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. And programming that that relationship with money. Ooh, I didn't even realize it. And we'll get into that, I'm sure, a little bit later when, when we sold everything and hit the road. It was incredibly powerful because I realized how much of me was wrapped into what I was doing, working. You know, as fathers, we get, okay, my name is Victor Robledo and I do this. Wait a second. If someone's not even asking you that, like, hey, there has to be more to us than just that.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. We tend as fathers, as men, to find our identity in what we do.
Exactly. That sort of reminds you of the Chris Rock stand-up. He'll say stuff like, you know, girls will ask guys will ask another guy, what's she look like? And sometimes what does he do? And so we get rolled into that a little bit as well.
It's kind of funny because our your good friend Carlos Mendez, that's how I met you. He had came on our podcast, earlier, and I met him at a function that we had for our industry for the Joint Apprenticeship Training Center. And he pointed that out. He's like, every single one of these guys who step up and talk and say, I'm so-and-so, I'm a journeyman lineman. That's the first thing we identify with, and it's a level of pride, you know what I mean? Because we put in the work to obtain that golden ticket, as we call it, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But, you're right. Our calling is much higher than that.
Ooh, there it is. That's so much. I agree with that. So growing up as a kid, those money mindsets start to get formed, and some of those to our detriment. And I'm sure your wife is shedding light on that. Like, whoa, why is that just coming out of me? Right. And so that's important to bring out, because that can impact the joy that we feel today.
I like that.
Yeah.
Now, Victor.
Yeah.
Do you feel your father had like a strong influence in your life, good or bad?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And as I thought about when I was invited onto the show, I realized some of the challenges that personally I was going to face for sharing my story, and also, but that vulnerability, I know we can help a lot of guys, because this will resonate, right? And so, all transparency, my dad was. Because I was the oldest of four. They worked really hard to put us in Catholic school. He was too tired to do anything but walk home, take off his boots, and lay down and just zone out before the next day of work. So in many ways, he wasn't as emotionally available as I might have liked. No, we have a wonderful relationship now. It's amazing how much we heal through our children.
Yes.
There was a time when I was just angry. He wanted me to play baseball. I never played baseball. I actually picked wrestling as high school, and a big part was like, well, I want to do something you don't know anything about. And that I'm sure that some part of that was potentially because I was angry. But what did happen is it provided an opportunity. Not only did my father give me these valuable tools, but at that point, my mom had two brothers who became very, very much father figures. And so when I was born, they were in their late teens and 20s. And so a lot of what I emulated was because of their influence. So they're the ones that taught me to throw a spiral. They're the ones that taught me to, kick a soccer ball. They're the ones that I emulated. They're the first ones to give me a weight set and have me work out and teach me how to bench press and teach me, all of which was completely foreign to my dad. My dad initially thought it was a big joke. He's like, you just don't want to work. You just want to go exercise. And so that created a little bit of a riff. And sometimes we have a good laugh about that. Now, remember when you used to call me lazy? I've had 30 years of success in this business now.
Right.
So my uncles provided a lot of that paternal, masculine roles, and had a big part in when I was growing up.
It's good to see that you had those male mentor role models that were in your life to emulate things that you liked, and you wanted to model yourself after,
Yeah, exactly. I just knew, especially they were in their 20s, they hadn't met their wives, and so they had free time to spend with me, and they did. And like I said, especially with sports, and again, like I remember them. Even I wanted to dress like them and look like them.
And it's so true, because I had an uncle who was one of the coolest men I ever met. Guy looked like Elvis. I mean, identical. I mean, he dressed like that. He loved nice old fast cars. He was a what we would call today into rockabilly. You know what I mean?
Oh, I know what that is. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But that's what he did. He had the cool cars, the fast cars, dressed really sharp. He always smoked a cigarette. You know what I mean? Looked really cool, like James Dean and all that era, right? Because that was his time frame. And I remember looking at that and seeing that. And I like that today. I like lowriders. I like bombs. I like all that stuff. And when you see my father, it's completely opposite. I mean, my dad is like the guy from Yellowstone, the father from Yellowstone, very clean cut, just hardworking man, ranch, hunting, fishing, he has a ranch right now, and one of the things he always told me is like, man, when you went to California, they ruined you. He told me, he's like, you came back, you're always wearing flip flops. You're always, he's like, do you even know how to work anymore? He'd tell me, and he just didn't understand that, sometimes our kids are not going to be like you. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
We have our own brains and our own past that we need to figure out and go down.
Oh, you're so right. You're 110% on this. And what I find most interesting in my programming now, when I work with individuals, I just jump into the deep end. Like, hey, let's get to this, because I spent 20 years in the business dealing with people in a certain way. I always tell people the first person that came to work out with me, I started working as a trainer in a commercial gym when I was 19 years old. And she called me from her bed the next day and said, I can't get out of bed. What do I do? And she was so sore, she couldn't move. And I was like, wait a second, there's got to be a better way. And so my training evolved to be like, okay, maybe understand that individual. And then as I got older and I had a family of my own, and I training and understood the stresses that people have. And now as I approach my later 40s now, I realize that a lot of people shoot themselves in the foot in these self-sabotage methods. The average person, think of it here, Dave, the average person knows what they should be eating and knows what they should be drinking. But yet when they get on to focus on this goal, they will inevitably fall off. And so I realized that it has nothing to do, yes, it's routines and all that, but still, we got to go upstream. Let's keep going upstream. And once I start going upstream with individuals and get down to the nitty gritty to find out, like, hey, do you not think you're worth this? Boom. Here we go. And now we start scratching at the surface of, hey, what kind of stuff happened? If you don't mind, let's talk about this kind of stuff, whether it's past traumas, whether it's how you grew up, what's your relationship with parents, what's your relationship with food. All of these things really ground into us and impact our ability to, first off, be happy. But then even bigger, think about how that can impact and permeate into relationships with our spouse or our children.
No, absolutely, man. Once you started talking about that, and you started, touching base on self-worth, right?
Oof, yeah.
Ooh, I mean, that's a big thing, because if you don't know what your self-worth is, you're going to consistently be trying to find your worth in things.
Ooh, there it is.
And you're absolutely true. I mean, I see that with fathers who talk to me about their daughters and, their risky behavior, all these different things. It's like, oh, let's get to the root of this thing. Let's see, how were you with them? How was your relationship with them and
There it
everything?
is.
And,
There it is.
it's just like those connections were severed because, fathers, we have a tendency of thinking that our job is just to provide and give
Right.
them things and whatever, but we fail to build those connections. We're relational people, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I think when people, having taught children, I still work with children
Mhm.
almost on the daily. Even when I close my brick and mortar, I still work classes and mentoring with children. And parents would always go like, "Yeah, I can't get them to do what you do. What do you do? How do you get them to do that?" I'm like, I listen to them, and I truly, over 20 years or 30 years now of teaching kids activities, kids gymnastics, kids workouts, I think every child is special and has genius inside them. And when I treat them that way,
Mhm.
and I treat my own kids, our job as fathers is to, yes, we have the discipline. We got to do all that. We do.
Yeah.
We got to draw those lines, but we got to also polish this rock and be like, all right, let's make this shine. Let's bring it
Mm.
forward.
Mm. I like that. I like that you said listening to, because a lot of times we don't want to listen. We want to go straight to the problem so we can fix it. Because men, that's what we do. We're problem solvers, right?
Right.
And we don't want to hear all the hoopla. We just want to say, okay, get to the point. And I've caught
Yeah.
myself. I'm guilty of that myself, of saying, all right, just get to the point, and you
Yeah.
can really, like, if you're paying attention, you'll see yourself just totally crush your daughter or your son or your spouse when you say, just get
Oh,
to the
yeah.
point, you
Oh,
know,
man.
that's so detrimental. So for those of you listening, don't ever do that. Okay. I'm a firm believer of learning from other people's mistakes. That's one thing my dad taught me. And, if you can take one thing from this, learn from what we say here
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. When I deal with husbands, and we get transparent, we get deep, and we're like talking about issues, relationship. The big part of that is like they'll start off like, "Hey, I want to lose this much weight. I want to bench press this much. I want to have this kind of body fat." And I go, "Oh, okay, let me evaluate your stress. How are your relationships? How are your this?" And I can really go like, "Look, we got to pump the brakes. You got to right now. You have some significant issues. I don't need to throw more stress with like you need to eat this way and do this much cardio, lift this much. Let's deal with this upstream problem first." And yes, you do need self-care as a father should be on your highest priority. It is never selfish to take care of yourself because then you will listen better.
No, and it's absolutely true. One of my apprentices the other day was talking to me, and he's like, "Man," he's like, "I haven't been able to eat." He was going through our little
Mm-hmm.
climbing class, which you call it, which is their first week at our apprenticeship. Okay, and it's rough
Okay.
on them. It is. We get some guys that just fly through it, and then we get some guys that are out of shape.
Sure.
And they show up, and we're not asking them to do anything that we couldn't do, but we're
Sure.
asking them to keep up with their class. And sometimes they come and they're not boomed up on that. And one of the apprentices came to me and he's like, "Man," he's like, "I haven't eaten in a couple of days. I can't eat. I'm not even using the restroom." And I'm
Ooh,
like,
that's not
"Dude,"
good.
I was like, "Dude, that's stress. You're completely stressed out right now. You
Yeah.
need to relax. You need to try to find yourself a calm, peaceful place where you can start doing some breathing and meditation and stuff like that, because you are extremely at your edge right now."
Yeah. And that's one of the big elements that I integrate with any new client now is like, look, we're going to be
Mhm.
jumping into breath work and meditation. And
Mm.
I go, I just want to work up, do the workout, do this and do that. And sometimes I go, look, we're only human. And
Mm.
the fact is a lot of people don't even feel essentially stressed out, but all their markers show that they are, which is like sort of adrenal fatigue sort of symptoms, which include like wired and tired, GI distress, like you just described, injuries that won't heal, symptoms of kind of low T, which I go, hey, look, you might not say you're stressed, but your body's certainly telling me.
Mhm. Mhm. That's
Yeah.
interesting that you talked about adrenal fatigue, because that's something that's plaguing a lot of the men I talk to.
Right.
They're tired. They're taking hormone replacements right
Right.
now. So do you think that, like, what's your personal or professional opinion on that, as far as what's a contributing factor? Just the stress and mitigating that stress? Will that alleviate that, or?
Sure. Yeah. So adrenal fatigue,
Mhm.
I definitely went through a significant amount of adrenal fatigue. And actually, this segues pretty well into how my trauma
Okay.
and a little bit of what growing up. Adrenal fatigue is a thing, guys. It totally exists. I went through it in my mid 30s, and I was basically the guinea pig. A lot of people, you go to a doctor, conventional doctor, they're going to say, oh, it doesn't really exist. Your adrenal glands, we say the word adrenal fatigue. And so do the adrenal glands not get tired? A doctor would say, of course they don't get tired, but insufficiency is absolutely the clinical term to describe that. And that wired and tired feeling is one of the biggest things. And, feeling best between 6 and 10 o'clock at night, GI distress, food allergies, anxiety, depression. My T at one point when I was in my mid 30s, in the middle of my busiest time having my business, was like of a 70-year-old. It was bad.
Mm.
And still no one knew about it. And what it caused, truthfully for me, is to reflect on something. When I was about 5, 6, 7, I think I have a lot of mental blocks associated with exactly the age. So I'm going to share all this, well knowing that a lot of people, and I encourage anyone as I share this story to kind of body compass, like feel into your body. If I share this and you're having a reaction, then we know there's a possibility that you have some stuff that's been stored inside of your body. And I'll get into that. So as I started going through this in my mid 30s, I started having high levels of anxiety, which I'd never had ever.
Mhm.
And when I was 8 years old, I was sexually abused pretty bad by a babysitter for years and years. And me and my siblings as well. And she was a family member, right?
Yeah.
And I was told some stuff if I ever opened my mouth, what would happen to my brothers and sisters. To this day, actually, when I tell this story, my hair stands up on my arms. And the scarier part is once we found all this out and it was exposed, my parents certainly sent her away, but that was it. Nothing
Mhm.
was done. There was no real opportunity to sort of talk. It was just brushed under the rug, and that created obviously some issues. Being the oldest, um, I was the mature one. My younger brother and sister had way more significant symptoms that something was wrong. And so my parents were focused on their care associated with that.
Mhm.
Now, one of the biggest parts that drove that anxiety, and why I'll land this plane, I promise, is that I would see this person at family get togethers
Oh, man.
and no one ever said anything, and there was never something done. And I remember the churning in my stomach. I don't know if you've ever felt like you both want to throw up and use the
Mhm.
bathroom at the same time. And I remember my little body feeling like I need to get out of here, but I can't move. I need to get out of here and I can't move. And so that kind of obviously leaves a mark on the human body. And as I started doing research in my mid 30s, like, okay, I get the adrenal fatigue part, but why do I feel like this? And it
Mhm.
had to do with the years and years of just pushing down those emotions, which of course is very masculine, isn't it, Dave? Like, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
we don't feel.
No.
And so when I started to feel that anxiety, I was like, wait a second, I remember this feeling. It was the same feeling as seeing this person at these parties, and it just created triggers and emotions and just that overwhelming amount of feeling that I was like, wait, what's going on? And so what it forced me to do is start to reflect upon that. And in the end, it's brought me to the point where I understand the connection between our mind and body. Anxiety, depression. Anxiety, I always tell my guys when they're going through it, anxiety is a gift. It's telling you it's time to address a specific thing in your life. And let's not steer away from it. Your body's trying to heal. And so as I went through that adrenal fatigue, I scratched at the surface. There's a wonderful book by Levine called Waking the Tiger.
Mhm.
And it talks about these three phases of the human body. We fight, or we freeze. right? Which I don't know if you're familiar with that. That
Yeah,
freezing
yeah.
is, so the freezing is what gives the human body a significant problem. And we see it on the savannah when a predator is about to catch the gazelle, and the gazelle plays possum, and
Mm,
it lays there like, and the prey drive in the predator goes away sometimes because it's playing possum. And then the animal goes through this thawing process if they capture it, where it gets up and it sort of shakes and releases that energy from that moment. Well, humans, we don't do that. If you ever think about it, we go through traumatic events, and I've had guns pulled on me and knives pulled on me in my youth, and I remember that freezing feeling and thinking to myself like, well, this is a very uncomfortable feeling. Well, that gets stored in the human body, and I realized as I went through that adrenal fatigue how much of that I needed to tap into to heal, and then also to start to feel again.
wow. And man, I look at that now, and I see the correlation with even with my own past experience, being a victim of a violent crime. I was stabbed
Right.
at 13. Um, and then just having to tap into that, like I always got into stuff that was very, very combative, right?
Right.
Combat sports to dangerous jobs, going to the military, to even transitioning into line work. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then even now with my wife, and my son have Lyme disease. Okay.
Okay.
Lyme disease triggered that limbic system that you're talking about, where your
Yeah.
fight or flight is,
Yeah.
to where it wired her brain to where her body actually was in such a traumatic state that she couldn't even eat. She was
Yeah.
losing weight and everything because her body was telling her, "Hey, everything
Yeah.
is bad for you." So she would eat something and her body couldn't even absorb it.
Yeah. So the amygdala is a
Mhm.
big part of that fight or flight, and we need it. If you're in a battle situation, it alerts you. But the
Mhm.
problem with it is that we cross into barriers now where the amygdala is hijacked. And how is
Mm.
it hijacked? Well, you take something like what happened to your wife, but that's obviously something greater. But at the same time, the average person, like if you ever walk around a restaurant and hear a text message, you see how many people reach and grab their phone at the same
Yep.
time. That's an amygdala. That's overactive amygdala. And anytime you encounter or are in a situation where you're constantly jumping and adjusting, and we know what media is doing these days, right? It's trying to keep us afraid.
Yeah. Yep.
and
Fear.
and fear. And so what ends up happening is that we have the vagus nerve, which is connected to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is where we feel every emotion,
Mhm.
especially the big ones: fear, sadness, anger. Right? There's 6 of them, but let's just focus on those. And so when you have a thought, that vagus nerve goes from the hypothalamus down to the liver, and has transferring those emotions to the liver.
Mm.
Right? It's directly wired. So then the liver has 200 different functions. As you can imagine, what is it going to do? Upregulate or downregulate your genes? It's going to downregulate your genes,
Mhm.
right? And start to impact your health. And then from there, eventually it creates a horrible loop, because in the loop, the liver starts talking to the brain and saying, oh, we know what to do. We're going to keep this guy grumpy and upset and thoughtless, and he's going to have this kind of temperament.
Mm. Holy smokes. I didn't realize how much of an impact how everything touches each other through
Yes,
that.
yes. And so this is through my experience. And then especially I literally over the last 2 years with everything that's happened, I literally saw my clients reliving some of their traumas. Now they didn't necessarily know it, but I could see it. And so they would walk in, I'm like, I gotta up my game, and started jumping into increasing my knowledge and understanding these connections. And then think about this, like the average dude thinks that, well, this is just my personality, but is
Mhm.
it? Or have you damaged your health enough that now you're on a loop, and you're going to stay in this loop unless you forecast and take action to create the life that you want and the relationships that you want? And this rounds it back to family, of course.
Mm-mm. No, and I see that too, because like my wife, you talk about this loop, right?
Mhm.
She had one of the trainings that she had to go through to be able to eat again, right?
Right.
Was she used the Annie Hopper's DNRS. I
Not
don't know if
familiar with
you're
that, but
familiar with it.
no.
And basically it's retraining your brain. So
Got it.
she has to sit there in meditation to focus on something that would bring trauma to her, and she
Mhm.
has to change the meaning of that. And I mean there's so much more to it, you know what I mean? But
But yeah. That's a great overview.
yeah, and I mean, it got her from not eating anything. I'm serious. Like she was eating like possibly like maybe 6 things that she could eat, right?
Yeah.
To where she can enjoy a cheeseburger at In and Out.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because she was just so bad. I mean, she looked like one of the starving kids in India or something. I
She
mean,
was
her
emaciated, huh? Oh, poor thing.
total just emaciated. You know, it was scary. You know, she didn't have no strength or anything like that. She couldn't really
That's
do
horrible.
anything. She was constantly in fear, just any kind of traumatic, and I experienced that this
Sure.
past year when I got I've had COVID 3 times. Okay.
Okay.
I'm pretty healthy, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't smoke, I don't,
You don't have
chew, I don't
comorbidities. Yeah.
drink. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I experienced COVID for the second time in November, and it was a weird thing. Like my vision went away. Like my glasses, I went to put on my glasses and I couldn't see with them on, but
Whoa.
I could see with them off for about an hour in the morning. You know what I
Interesting.
mean? It
Yeah.
was it was weird, and they said it was because of the pressure that I had in my head. It was affecting the cones and rods of my eyes or something like that. You know what I mean? I'm not a doctor, but that's what they told me. But
Yeah.
it was like, since my body was experiencing this weird thing, you know what I mean, where I was getting these night cold sweats where I would
Yeah.
take a credit card and I could scrape my arm and
Mhm.
immediately the sweat would beat up. Almost
Wow.
immediately, it was puddling, right? It was weird. I'd never experienced anything in my life like that. It wasn't any of the cold symptoms like, these people talk about or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, it was just really traumatic and really weird. I never lost my taste buds or smell or anything like that, but everything was more like, say for instance, when I have a pineapple or a lemon, it was
Mhm.
super strong. Like I could barely even handle it. I was like,
Wow.
wow, this is super sour. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it
Well,
just changed everything.
yeah, I think, when I'm doing evaluations on people,
Hmm.
I always describe this your bucket of stress of tolerance, right? And
Hmm.
our job, or my job as a coach, is to like empty out some of that stress, because otherwise that stuff's splashing out, and it
Hmm.
just sounds like your body was already sort of at some limit, and and it just put it over the top, and that's why you potentially created all these more symptoms. That's as simply as I could put it for a lot of people. And I kind of went through the same thing, when we sold everything, and started traveling the world.
Hmm.
I kind of got that same trigger. One of the big things is that, as I recovered through that adrenal fatigue, and I discovered that my trauma had an impact on the person I was, and my emotions, and how I was parenting. And my wife looked at me one day and she said, and my wife's my soulmate, I love her, because given that I was laying on a pile on the floor, and
Hmm.
she was like feeding me bone broth to get me through the days, because I didn't miss a day of work, of course.
Hmm.
And no worky, no pay when you're self-employed.
Yeah.
And and so, she says, look, this stuff is all great, but we want you.
Mm.
And that's where we saw a documentary called Surf Wives with Doc Paskowitz. He traveled up and down the coast of California with his 8 boys and daughter. And
Hmm.
she said, "Hey, we should do that." I said, "Yeah, that'd be awesome." And so we bought an RV. We lived at that point. We had moved near Coronado, so I could work more. But of course, or so I could grow the business. But of course, I was working more. And so at that point, the lady we were renting the house with said, "Hey, I want my house back." And so we packed up everything we had, downsized everything, got rid of a bunch of stuff, and hit the road with my 5 kids in a 28-foot Class C motorhome, and with the idea of just doing it for the entire summer.
Mm.
And so we did that. And And that's when I realized how much of me was wrapped up in what I was doing for work.
Mhm.
And I had a hard time.
Wow, I bet, now you're forced to be around each other and be in those tight quarters and to start dealing with issues that you probably didn't even know you had, correct? With your
Yeah,
family and
yeah,
stuff.
exactly. Well, one thing we did do, and this I guess makes us even more outliers, is that
Mhm,
we have homeschooled our 5 kids since the very beginning.
mhm,
And a big part of owning our own business was the dream was to be together all the time. So that wasn't as much of a problem being together because they were usually spending a lot of time at
mm,
work. And then as the kids grew older, my wife would be like, okay, I'm gonna run this person to soccer, this person over here, this person over here. But what was challenging is how much we talked about the hard wiring of our
mhm,
bodies and trauma. And on some micro level, I was uneasy relaxing. You ever get that feeling where, like, after, like, most of my guys will say they get back off a hard day of work, they got to unwind.
mhm,
Well, I
mhm.
had that real difficult time traveling. And when we got after 4 months of on the road, I looked at my wife and kids, and everyone is just happy. And I said, what if we keep going? And we kept going. And from there on, the first big trip we took abroad was 6 months with backpacks in Europe. With
Wow.
my youngest was 4, my oldest was 13 at the time.
Wow. It,
And yeah, go ahead.
were you guys staying at like hostels or like just
So
backpacking or?
we backpacked. The first 90 days were intense.
Mhm,
I remember landing in Norway, and we had what I call a California tent. If you
mhm,
ever go camping in Norway, the sun never sets in the summer. So make sure you have a blackout tent.
mm,
And so we would lay there and we camped. And part of it we rented an RV and traveled all the way to Croatia and drove around. But I have to tell you, like, I was reliving. I was wired still. I hadn't done enough work. I was still wired to pick up on fear. My wife
mm,
would get into these awesome towns and she'd say, okay, we're going to move on. I'd say, wait, I haven't relaxed yet. We can't leave yet. I have to spend more time here to relax before. And so I really felt like a watchdog on this. And it wasn't until obviously I would reflect on the adrenal fatigue that I have, the wiring. I'm like, okay, somehow this is connected. I got
mhm,
to really take this apart, until at one point my wife and I were arguing on this trip. We were in the south of France surfing in Hosager, where the pro surf tour goes. And we're arguing because she says, like, I'm just grumpy all the time. I'm not happy. I got to figure it out. Like, look, we're fine. Why are you always worried? Why are you always about safety? And so I paddle away from her and take a wave a little bit late. And I just almost lose my eye. The surfboard tombstones comes up, hits me just below the eye. And I'm thinking to myself, what just happened? I really thought my eyeball was out of the eye.
mm,
And it created obviously some stress, even more stress. I thought our trip was over. And so
mhm,
that was one of those moments, a culmination, like, whoa, what is going on? And years later now, still full timing, still living in an RV. I have these lessons that I've learned and then combined with the science to help people understand what's really hardwired and what is happening to us as men that we
mm,
need to talk about.
mm. No, that's interesting because some of the stuff that I deal with is like crowds. If
Right.
we're in a big crowd, there's a lot of things going on. I'm trying to focus and trying to, for whatever reason, as a man, I always look to see for in the crowd to see, for one, any danger. I do a quick glance to see what looks like danger.
Right.
Uh, Number two, find a way out. Right.
Right.
And number three, just to see where my family's at and make sure that they're close if I feel a perceived threat. And I don't know why I get like that. I don't know. And it's just in crowds when there's a lot of people. It could be Disneyland. It could be wherever, you know what I mean? It could be at the grocery store if there's a lot of people, Costco or whatever.
Dave, I'm glad you mentioned that because look, you in this already with us dialoguing,
Mm-hmm.
you alluded to the fact of why it could be. You were stabbed. It was 13 when you were stabbed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the vast majority of how we deal with our stress as adults is formulated between that sweet spot of 6 and 12, or in your case, 6 and 13. And so on some level, every time there's a stress trigger, obviously that's a very specific one, but on some level, like, whether you're standing in line at the grocery store and you're a little bit tired, that stress reaction, that body, like, oh, I know what to do. It's this, boom. I know what to do. It's this. It's that primitive brain that's wiring us. And my biggest concern with that, with my gentlemen, is that like they want to let go of that. And we have to be intelligent. We live in a modern world. We can't outsource that. But if it's impacting, like it would impact my dialogue with my wife in a public place. Do you ever get that?
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm like, she's like, why are you looking over there? You've already looked over there 6 times. And I'd say, I'm sorry. And then I try to get engaged in the conversation and something would happen. And I realized like, oh, because look, we know plenty of guys, we just talked about Carlos. Like, I had a very good, I feel very privileged to have helped and worked with so many teams, guys, because of working in Coronado. And I pulled one aside when I was going through all this anxiety. I'm like, hey man, can I talk to you about something? And he says, yeah, sure. And I'm like, do you ever have anxiety? And he's like, yeah, actually I do, Victor. And he tells me a story about, kicking the doors down. Right. And he says right before, he's like, that's when I usually feel it. And I say a little prayer and I go to work and I'm like, dang man, I don't have that in my life. There's an amplification. There's something that has amplified my reaction. And that comes to that little bit of programming that's rooted in us. Like, it's not safe.
Man. And that's just like, is that like an internal clock or a warning or something that's, since it's wired, right?
It's wired.
It's automatically letting us know that, hey, this is a situation.
Yes. And Dave, the bigger one is I alluded to the fact on how it could be a loop because you're doing it so often. Now the body's sending the loop to the brain. So, I'm a big fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I highly recommend anyone that's looking to reprogram go into that. And I use a lot of his principles associated with that because the vast majority, 90 to 95% of the thoughts that we have, 90 to 95% of the thoughts we have are subconscious. And we have about 80,000 thoughts a day.
That's a lot of thoughts, right? Subconscious thoughts.
It's subconscious thoughts. So that wiring that we talked about, there it is. There is the elephant in the room that my guys, we need to talk about. Like, hey, let's just get it out. Like, for the first thing I realized is like when I told the story, how about you? When you told me your 13-year-old story, did you have a visceral, physical, like I used to get the hairs. I always talk about the hairs on my arm stand up. Like I get that alerted feeling. And even right now, as I'm talking about it, I can almost trigger that, or you feel like you're still stored in you.
Yeah, I definitely see where there's some issues still along with that. What helped me was the guy actually wrote me a letter from prison.
Wow.
This is probably about 10 years ago. And he was still in prison for other stuff he had done. He shot some guy in the face or whatever.
Wow.
But he wrote me a letter telling me he was sorry. And he felt like, he didn't blame me if I didn't, accept his apology. So
yeah. Wow. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's
so
huge.
that was big for me,
Yeah. And I think about those things. And this is a real important level too, Dave, because you and I both are both talking about there's big T trauma and little T trauma. And I remember doing a study and one lady said, I've known women, I'm watching this and I'm doing this course who have been, raped 6 times. And they are strong and never been impacted. And I've seen women whose dads walked in while they were taking a shower just be destroyed by it. Everyone is different. And so we don't ever downplay your experience like, oh, this is what happened to me. It's not a big deal. No. It can be, because you want to take back your sovereignty and be present for your family and your kids. And that's important.
Do you think, how do you think shame plays into that? Like,
oh, that's huge. Huge. And that's another one of those big six that
Mm.
talk to the body. Like I told you about that amygdala hijack, that hypothalamus talking to the liver. The reality is, guys, health is more than just a workout and, eating low carb.
Yeah.
Health, mental health and physical health are one and the same. And so bringing an understanding of who you are, more awareness to your thoughts, which are significant. Think about how many we just talked about. Like, we got to bring awareness to those more to those subconscious thoughts. Like, what has my brain consistently told myself? Because what ends up happening is we end up running on a loop, and the body remembers the past. Because it remembers the past, and now you've taught it to reflect on the past, it's consistently on a loop. And so what is your future going to look like? Like your past.
I heard a sermon in church where they talked about how what we focus on dictates our future, right? So
Right.
they explained it like a car. Okay.
Right.
Say you're in a car, you have this big old windshield. Okay.
Right.
It's big for a reason, so you can see the future. Okay.
Right.
And then you have this little rear view mirror, which you're designed to just glance at every
Right.
every few moments or whatever, right?
Right.
And that's the same thing with our past and our future. Our past, we can't change it. It's there, but it's never designed for us to drive with that or go forward in the future.
That's it, Dave. That's it. And my wife and I sit down and do courses, and we have this course called Reignite the Passion. Because I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when you're standing outside of a couple, you can see that they're having potential troubles, but you can also see, usually as a guy, and even as if you're standing with your wife and talking about that couple, how they could work it out. But oftentimes people are too close to the problems to solve it. And so we outlined 5 steps on how to make sure your relationship is being taken care of. And the first one is, taking care of your hormones and eating right, eating well-sourced food. For my guys, it's all about getting your testosterone up with well-sourced proteins and meats, getting all the processed foods out. And that's very, very, most people can understand a healthy whole foods diet. Then it's playing together with your spouse, right? You got to start doing that, because a lot of people look, it's okay to go out for a meal every once in a while, but if we're into health and fitness, that even the average restaurant's not only providing you most of it's not so hot. So you're going to want to pick the potato skins or whatever. And then we started to do a lot of work evaluating my clients, my kids, and my wife and I on Enneagram. Are you familiar with the Enneagram test?
No.
So Enneagram is much like MBTI, Myers and Briggs, but the Enneagram is a personality test. And what's valuable about it is, if you're having difficulty with your spouse, we're always in. It's like I always tell people, look, we're in a contract negotiation. The contract's always changing. You need to revise it every once in a while. Sit down and deal with it like that. That's very masculine. Like, hey, let's talk. Let's talk about this contract. And when we do the Enneagram test, I encourage everyone to find it. It's widely available. Test alongside your spouse, right? So that, because we have a tendency to see ourselves a certain way instead of actually what we are. Test alongside your spouse. Each one of these Enneagrams, it goes 1 through 9, has a list of core beliefs and core values. And when you start bringing husband and wife together, and you go, okay, look, these are your core values. Did you know that these were your husband's core values? And of course, we don't put anyone in a box. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to bring greater insight into their relationship so they can squash these little things that keep coming up. Like, all right, this is Dave's core values. He believes in, being courageous and moral. And he wants to be, I'm a 2. I'm all about service. And so the problem with that is I can get into the point where I'm resentful because I'm not being taken care of, right? And so when you come in and test each other and test your kids, even, you have an idea of what their needs are a little bit more. And I can do it just by talking to people. But when you're in a relationship with your spouse, or you're having trouble with your daughter, we have a tendency to give what we need or what we like, as opposed to what they need.
Yep. Why do we do that?
That's just a reflection, right? We just know, oh, like I'm big on, some people it's cool that the get acts of service. People like acts. I did this thing for you, or gifts, right? Some people like gifts. Like my wife early on is like, it's a complete waste of time for you to buy me flowers. I'd rather you spend time with me. Right? Because she's time. And that goes back to the 4 love languages. But Enneagram tests can serve quite a bit to help us understand each other in a way that we can stand on it in a very logical way and go, oh, I didn't look at, there it is. I know what you kind of need. Let's make sure this happens. And so that's the third thing that we always talk about in that course. And then we always talked about scripting and looking forward. And we already alluded to the problem with the past, right? So scripting your relationship forward with your kids. When I raise my kids, it's all about like, where do I want to be? Where do I want them to be when I grow up? What kind of relationship do I want to have? What kind of person do I want to have? Now I have a ton of kids and they're all over the board with a personality. But I've been thankful that I've been able to, my oldest is 22, my youngest is 11, and they've been able to step into their own passion. In our household, it's absolutely important thing that they find and discover that passion. And my job is to keep them moving. And when we homeschooled them, it was all about that. It was like Socratic in many ways. And I know a lot of people can't do that, but let's face it, we always have to supplement the school system anyway. So you're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And to find that passion for your kids. And, I remember my son with sports. When he was little, I wanted him to be in team sports. And I remember him covering his ears when he played soccer. And I was a wrestler in high school. And so I wanted him to wrestle, and he would wrestle and he would cry every day. And he told me he hated it. I'm like, okay, look, you don't have to do it. But, if you went to school, you'd have to run the mile every Friday. So we're going to run the mile. And he hated it. And he hated it because I timed him and I expected him to get better. And then one day he looked at my wife and says, if I run 2 miles, will you stop timing me? Well, lo and behold, Daniel, before he was 13, was running marathons and ran and ran a 50 miler before he was 18. And so if you can really scratch at the surface of what makes each kid tick and figure out what makes you tick, you can step into being a husband, father, a son, that you never thought you might become.
No, I like that, because you're absolutely right. Part of us being fathers is to help our children, right, develop those gifts that you're talking about. And I'm glad to see that you talked about that, because you're absolutely right. We got to help them find that passion and then help them navigate to get there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the jobs that our kids will have not even yet been created. Think about how quickly things have jumped forward in the last 10 years, and think about how quickly COVID destroyed we don't need a book. Like my son, my kids are all pretty musically inclined and completely self-taught because they just go find the information. They said, hey, I want to learn to play the drums, Dad. I'm like, well, I'll get you the drums. I'm like, should I take lessons? I'm like, go find music that moves you and figure out a way.
That's super, super interesting, bro. Victor, I wanted to ask you before we hop off of here, brother.
Sure.
What is something that you could share with our audience that they should be doing or could be doing right now just to become a more intentional father that you could share with our audience?
So I thought long and hard, because I thought potentially you'd ask me something like this. And there were so many things that come to mind when I say that. But I think the most important thing that I can say as a father, having worked with children for so long, I've been with my wife almost 30 years, is that self-care from a level of attention of not only health and wellness in a traditional sense, but take care of your mental well-being, whether it's getting in a church group, talking to other men, confiding, share those experiences, and be mindful and self-aware of those thoughts that could be derailing what you perceive is your success with your family and your children. We're here such a short period of time. It's a damn shame when we end the day and go, dang it. Look, we all screw up. We all screw up as fathers. Every day I go, oh yeah, I could have done that one better. but if we have a goal and we're working towards that goal, set up your life and your self-care so you can be the father you imagine you can be. And if you can imagine it, you can start to build that up.
Once again, thank you, Victor, for coming on here and just sharing all your
Thank
information
you.
with us, brother. So much. I got to hear this again. you know, thank you for doing what you're doing and for coming on this podcast, brother. And how could our audience reach you?
You can find out about our adventures at nomadswithapurpose.com. That's also on all social medias. If you're looking for coaching, it's coach_Victor_Robledo. And I'm going to be holding I decided I had one good friend that recently passed, and I was supposed to collaborate with them to put together a camp. I call it Man Camp. I'm putting my first ever Man Camp together where we come together and deconstruct everything we just talked about. It's in Memorial Day, and you can find the information for that camp on our website as well.
Once again, Victor, thank you for coming on, brother, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.